Hey guys, welcome to book review number 15. This week I will be reviewing Murders in the Mausoleums, Riding the Back Roads of Empire Between Moscow and Beijing by Jeffrey Taylor. There. Alright, so I really enjoyed this book. The basic premise is in the year 2005, Jeff, exploring post-Soviet Union, post sort of Mao China, took a road trip, or more precisely, I guess kind of a train trip, road trip, whatever transportation possible from Beijing, from Moscow, Russia to Beijing, China. Going through southern Russia, such as Chechnya and near the Georgian border, over into Kazakhstan, and through the heart of Kazakhstan, all through the country, down to Kyrgyzstan, then into Uyghuristan, or I don't know, Uyghur Autonomous Republic, yeah, in China. And then into China proper, and Inner Mongolia itself, to Beijing. Well, anyway, what I really enjoyed about this was the variety of styles shown in this book. I really feel like at times it was very gritty, realistic, kind of really just portraying the slop of people's lives. The poverty, etc. But at other times, noting such things as the hospitality or just contrast of the general demeanor of the people. He also did a very good job of interspersing sort of the larger aspects of the country, as well as his personal experiences within the country, kind of going back and forth between the two. Kind of to just review the general regions that he covered, sort of the southern Russia, Caucasus regions. He focused pretty extensively on the Cossacks, the Chechens, and just the variety of different ethnic groups that were there, and how people tended to hold blood feuds and really could not see a larger picture for the betterment of their region or their country or whatever. Would just rather focus on, getting your neighbor back, or kind of ethnic hatred, which he said has become prominent across the whole ex-Soviet Union, but particularly in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. So anyway, then he kind of went up the coast to kind of briefly stopping by the Caspian Sea and noting, I don't know, just kind of the desert area, but then going into Kazakhstan. And some of the key things he mentioned in Kazakhstan were kind of the environmental after effects of the Soviet occupation, I guess you would call it, or just the generally Kazakhstan under the Soviet Union. These include the nuclear test sites that have left health problems throughout different regions of the country, droughts brought on by excessive farming in the region, particularly cotton, under the collectivized farms of the Soviet Union, the aerial sea salinization and shrinkage to the point where it's hardly even a body of water anymore. There's a bird outside. Let's see, what else was there? I guess, and what the current sort of environmental thing that's going on, which is the mass exploitation of natural gas and oil, which are bringing the country its wealth. Um, and the particular thing that he noted was the sort of how poverty and gaudiness kind of intermingled within the country in a very strange, not really humanizing way. For example, there were in the capital, Anazia, which is, I believe, how you pronounce it, the new capital that the president created in 1992 or 93. It was full of skyscrapers that seemed to do nothing, that costs millions of dollars to build, but there was still, mass disease and poverty across the country. Large numbers of people were living a subsistence lifestyle. Yeah, I guess also I should briefly mention just kind of the effect that the Soviet Union had on the gulags in the region. Specifically, Kazakhstan was one of the most famous places to ship dissidents, even minor or borderline dissidents, to, and how this really changed the course of not only individuals but families moved to that region. So yeah, I mean, it just seems like a country that definitely has potential in terms of its oil and natural gas wealth, but I guess you'd say culturally, I guess, is just in a bad spot. Doesn't really seem to know, as the case with many oil countries, doesn't really seem to know how to use its wealth for the betterment of its people. Okay, and then he went over to Kyrgyzstan, and what I found interesting about the Kyrgyzstan region was the romanticism involved. Now, Kyrgyzstan has even less money than Kazakhstan because it has really very few or minimal natural resources. But what it did sort of bring up was how the Kyrgyz are really mountain people, and how that isolation creates both a sense of idealism, with these huge mountain lakes, nomadic people living in the high valleys, the mist, or whatever, but also a sense of desperation where, for example, they were carjacked, essentially tried to be scammed by a car, an incident on a highway there. And it really just kind of shows you how, although areas may be beautiful, they certainly are not livable or likable. But at the same time, he talked about, for example, how he was up near a high stream and the stars shone down and there was no other light. With these blankets out in the wilderness, but then again, the hotel that he was supposed to stay at, that was like a half-mile away, was full of drunken truckers filled with vodka. I should say vodka plays very prominently, as you would assume, in most of these ex-Soviet republics, though less so sort of in the Muslim regions, but that's just because of the religious influence. Okay, let's wrap this up. Finally, he went on to Uyghurstan, which is the Muslim Turkish ethnic group in China, and is actually demographically being overtaken by the Han Chinese in their Western program, I believe is the name, which is essentially developing the West. If you know anything about China, the East is very highly populated, but the West, just because it's been a desert for so long, there's really no people out there, but China's central government is trying to change that because of resource exploitation. There's a lot of oil in that part of the country. Um, so, of course, when anytime there's a demographic change within a specific region, there's ethnic tensions. Um, and just the kind of tension between the Han Chinese and the Uyghurs is very prevalent, particularly being that the Han Chinese tend to be more wealthy than the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are semi-nomadic or recently not nomadic peoples, whereas the Han Chinese, as a whole, generally don't possess or individually may not possess wealth. As a whole, they certainly possess more wealth than at least the Uyghurs. And yes, that is how you pronounce the name of those people. He also did some extensive time in a nightclub in, I believe it's Umakwe, which is the capital of the Uyghur Autonomous Republic, which I thought was kind of a good change of pace. You know, he was talked extensively about all these political and social issues, pretty much to that point in the book, and kind of interspersed his own story some, and his feelings on the thing. But I really feel like what he did well in that section was just completely separate himself from politics, much like many of the Hans did, and just try to get in the life of a young immigrant Han who could find a job in the West and moved out there to better their life. And part of the at least superficial way of bettering your life is going to a nightclub and just enjoying your youth or whatever. So kind of talked about a little bit of the decadence and the difference in norms of those in that area. Finally, he went on to Mongolia, or Inner Mongolia, not the Republic of Mongolia, but Inner Mongolia in China, visiting, the Great Wall, as well as the mausoleum of Genghis Khan, and how people praised Genghis Khan there, but in reality there was sort of a divergence in their view to what really happened. Now, I should say, I feel it was a little critical to Genghis Khan here. Certainly Genghis Khan was a killer and an awful person to Russia, which I should say that is where he lives. He lives in Moscow, even though he's an American. And was very critical of, the disease and the warfare and the barbarianism brought on. But, I think it is kind of understandable how someone with that much, how a peoples who had a leader with that much power, who are now pretty much disempowered, even the Republic of Mongolia has minimal power. It's not a strong country at all. Could look to their past for some sort of national identity or national pride. It's certainly not the perfect circumstance, but I feel he was maybe a little critical of the people at the time, just because of he saw all these terrible things Genghis Khan did, but for disenfranchised people, having someone of power in a past time is going to mean something to them, whether they recognize the atrocities or not. It's just the way it is. So anyway, he finally went into Beijing and ended his journey. I should say he started his journey. I didn't say this before the southern Russia part. There was a brief part at Red Square in Moscow with Lenin's mausoleum. And so he ended the book, that's the beginning of the book, he ended the book at Tiananmen Square in Beijing with, of course, Mao Zedong's mausoleum, and just generally talked about, kind of drew a lot of conclusions about power and democracy and authoritarian government, which he was pretty universal in terms of the countries, well, ubiquitous in terms of the countries that he visited in the book, and just kind of how they were no longer communists, but there was sort of a dictatorial capitalist state that, state monopolies that would be corrupt and funnel money into, various cronies and stuff like that. So he kind of wrapped